Welcome to the SOTI video series. My name is Richard Fitzsimmons.
And I am David Isa, both of us senior principal instructors here at SOTI. And what are we going to be looking at today, Richard?
Well, David, in this video, we're going to spend some time introducing and discussing the role of an MQTT broker with SOTI Connect for devices that use the MQTT protocol.
Sounds good. And for those that are joining us right now, please know that we have already covered the architecture of SOTI Connect and how to get it up and running. And I'm talking about the core components of SOTI Connect. So if you haven't consumed those two videos, please go ahead because it's going to make a lot more sense when you are going through the contents of this video, please.
That's it. So we've already installed SOTI Connect and relevant protocol adapters on a server. And now we're moving over to, in this case, as I said, an MQTT broker, which is used for communication and brokering for MQTT devices. Now, there are a number of different brokers that can be used, but in our case, we'll be using something called HiveMQ. And just before I go through the prerequisites, we've downloaded HiveMQ from the HiveMQ website. This is an open source tool, and I'm actually just going to choose to extract this, and I'm just choosing to run this in its current default state. So we can see kind of, how it's initially set up and then consider some of the changes that we might need to make for it to communicate with SOTI Connect and to the devices that we need. So I'll extract it here. And now I've extracted out, I'll probably just do a quick cut and also move it over to my program files because it's a good location for this this type of resource. And if I go into HiveMQ, let me just run HiveMQ. Here's the run batch file. I'll run this as an administrator and just see how it's running. It's the default setting.
There's a couple of things to consider when HiveMQ is used. Two things. Number one is that there's multiple different versions of HiveMQ. There are the community version, which is what we're showing right now, which is an open source and there's no cost associated. But HiveMQ also comes in commercial versions that add security and add simplicity in its deployment. And it's a good idea to get in touch with HiveMQ to get access to those type of systems if that's what you choose to do. But the other thing that is very important is to know that HiveMQ has requirements in terms of systems, including the version of Java that is installed on your environment. So then if that is not met, when you run this batch file, you're actually going to get a few error messages. So if you have to do anything, if it asks you to press any key, that means that something is missing and you have to fix it in order to be able to run it the way that Richard showed it.
Yes, and on that note, when you mentioned about the commercial edition of HiveMQ, this can include things like role-based access extensions and getting this to run as a Windows service rather than a batch file, just making sure that the ongoing management of this broker is effective and efficient. But as we're looking at here now, how does HiveMQ look to be running, and and what port is it listening on?
Well, it shows right here that it's a TCP connection listening on port 1883. So if I can use some of my knowledge on TCP IP, I know that this means that there's no protection, there is no encryption in this communication. It's an open TCP connection that is available, and that may not be the best choice when we are setting up something in our enterprise.
Absolutely. So this is the default setting, but we do need to make some changes, particularly if we're looking for, for enterprise and device communication as well. So to mention some of those prerequisites for HiveMQ and also prerequisites for the changes that we need to make. Firstly, David, you mentioned that this is a tool that runs in Java if we're using HiveMQ. So we need to have the appropriate version of Java. So this will be Java 11 or OpenJDK 11, and that would need to be sourced before HiveMQ will run. The HiveMQ broker itself or the MQTT broker would need to be sourced from its relevant repository. As said, we're using HiveMQ, and also we'll be using a tool called Portical. Now, we'll give a little bit more information about what this is later on, but it is linked to the fact that HiveMQ uses Java. Now, given that we're thinking about encryption, what else are we going to need to keep in mind?
Well, I guess the first thing is because we want to enable that secure connection, we're going to have a certificate that allows us to secure that port and accept connections, server connections that can be serviced through TLS.
Yes, that's it. And it's important to note that HiveMQ accepts both server-side TLS mode, so this is a server certificate, or a client certificate mode, which will be a server certificate and client certificate options. Though please note that not all of the devices, not all of the printers support the second option. So for today, we're going to be focused on that first option of making sure this is set up for server-side TLS encryption and communication.
Sounds good.
Now, once we've considered and set up our server certificates, we need to make sure that they are in the right format for Hive MQ, because that's the thing we're configuring for server-side authentication. And Hive MQ uses Java. So what do I mean by that?
Well, since Java is the underlying technology that builds HiveMQ, certificates in Java need to be recognized, need to be used using the Java key store in order for them to be accessed and in order for them to be used appropriately. So we have to transport those certificates into a keychain, which is the Java key store, and that's where protocol comes handy.
That's it. Yeah, essentially we are porting the server certificate into the HiveMQ requirement. And then once this is all done, we can then configure HiveMQ using that server-side authentication, meaning that it can communicate with the SOTI Connect protocol adapter that we set up previously, and also importantly the MQTT devices. And one example of a device that uses MQTT for communication would be Zebra thermal printers.
Absolutely. And I also want to mention one thing, that process that Richard talked about, that is about getting that protocol adapter to see and use the broker, that is the only time that we register elements in SOTI Connect. So when you hear the word registration, we're talking about a protocol adapter speaking to the middleware that it needs to establish communication to the end system. So in the case of MQTT, we're going to have the MQTT protocol adapter or the MQTT RPC protocol adapter. We're going to be registering HiveMQ to it, so then those devices can now be seen, found, and managed by SOTI Connect.
Thank you for joining us for this video where we've discussed what is required to configure an MQTT broker to work with SOTI Connect. Join us for further SOTI Connect videos where we'll work through the configuration process step by step.
And don't forget, for further tutorials, please visit and subscribe to the SOTI YouTube channel. And for more information about the SOTI One platform, visit us at SOTI.net.